It is Fight News Now. I'm John Pollock, as always, joined by John Ramdeen and Robin Black. It's a quiet week, but we do have some issues to discuss. First of all, not really a topic we can discuss, but just a real frightening incident involving Anthony Pettis. If you're not familiar with this, it was reported late Thursday night that an unknown suspect who's at large set fire to two vehicles in the driveway of Anthony Pettis' home. A third vehicle caught fire, and they're going off of a witness that saw a speeding car. But you see the photos. Like, this is pretty frightening stuff that occurred, and hopefully the authorities can find whoever did this. But thankfully, no one was injured in all of this, but still something very concerning.
Yeah, there's some strange people. I wonder if it was Max Holloway.
Yeah, it was not Max Holloway, but whoever it was has never seen Anthony Pettis fight, and they're an idiot.
Wow. John Ramdeen, everybody. With
Max Holloway did not do it, people.
Don't need
he
to make
did
light,
it.
but yes, it's an awful situation. I'm sure they're going to catch whoever did it.
Let us move on. Before we get to some fights, Ben Folks and Stephen Morocco put together this very interesting look at the recent sale of WME IMG purchasing the UFC. And we actually got some numbers here of like the actual sale price, the recent cuts that they made across the board, about $28 million in payroll that they slashed coming out of this, and seeing how all of these big bonuses kick in once they hit certain earnings in 2017, 2018. Ultimate Fighter production budget being slashed significantly down to $10 million. I mean, we're at least learning a lot more about this sale, John, and recently just the cuts made to the UFC. I mean, these were massive cuts that they made with $28 million worth.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the strategy. As a matter of fact, we had an ex-employee that we were just talking to that was in our studio 30 minutes ago and was talking about the landscape of things. And basically, if you understood what
John
was coming,
playing that insider card.
Well, it's true. But the fact is, if he said,
It was like 40 minutes ago.
Yeah, let's say 40 minutes ago. The fact is, everybody understood that this was coming, but they were blindsided because right now it's just kind of a reactionary thing from the UFC. It's like, you know, something's happening. We don't know exactly what's happening. Oh, this has happened. You have to deal with it because of the fact that they have to make the money up that they lost. So it just comes down to, where do you slash? You slash wherever you can, and unfortunately it comes from the staff to begin with.
Well, that was 40 minutes ago, and like 8 minutes ago, for real, we were talking to a long-time television executive, in the Canadian television business, and he was giving insight into somehow how these types of things work. And it would be the music business, it would be a restaurant, it would be pretty identical. When you go and you borrow money to go and purchase something, part of that borrowing comes in with you telling the people you borrow it from that you're going to cut X, Y, and Z by this date. That is a part of building the whole picture. So by the time you actually come into it, this is guaranteed you're doing it. It's this freaky thing, man. You open up the rocks underneath how business works, the whole thing is scary. Like banks, businesses, like we live in a very, very volatile business world.
It's going to be a very different UFC next year, and as well, the approach that they take, where they've got to hit these big figures. I think it's going to change everything about the style of promotion, what kind of fights they're putting together, how they treat pay-per-views.
How many shows they're having.
I mean, is the idea of scaling back on certain shows in order to bolster up shows that reflect much more deeper cards and attract more people on pay-per-view. I think everything's going to be changing. It's going to be a very different look in 2017.
I have to agree.
Yeah, and you know what's weird? When you're totally wrong about something, it's really important to go back, admit you were totally wrong about it, and then study what you didn't know and what you may have learned. I was like, they won't change anything. They'll change nothing. Why would anyone buy something worth $4 billion and change it? That was a logical way that my brain was looking at it. But the answer, where I was missing, is the people in there aren't thinking that. They're looking at something and going, oh, it makes that? Well, I can do even better. If we cut costs and raise whatever, I was way wrong on that. And I believed that. I looked at that and thought, if I bought an expensive item, I wouldn't want to screw it up. But I'm not the type of person who has and plays with hundreds of millions of dollars. I think they're very different than us.
One of the reasons why is because Robin was taking the idea or the philosophy that the Ultimate Fighting Championship is going to continue to grow. The goal is to dominate Asia, for example, and make sure that you put down your roots internationally. It doesn't seem like that's even a priority at all for the UFC right now. The goal is take your biggest stars, make sure it's a North American product. Yeah, sure, if you happen to go overseas, you're going to go overseas, but focus on what you have at home, build it from there, and try to create the biggest stars and take the most away from those shows in North America. And if you happen to find success overseas, great, but they're not focused on
And come to think of it, and the guys in the back can correct me if I'm wrong, because they know about sports and I really do not. But I seem to recall the NFL and the NHL have looked at expanding into Europe and Asia or into international places. And almost always the people behind it are like, nope, that's a waste of money. It's too challenging, and figure out how to make it. But yeah, I really did truly think, why would you change anything? You bought this thing because it's so good. But the real way these guys think, I guess, is we know how to optimize it. We know how to make it run smoother. We know how to make it make more money. We'll find out if they're right.
And I mean, you just have to look at the evidence of the fact that it was the Asian office that got hit huge with the cuts. The Canadian office was gutted from these recent cuts, and seeing the Ultimate Fighter budget reduced to $10 million for the year, this is speculation, but you would think it's a possibility that they're going to shelve the international versions of the Ultimate Fighter, even though those were tools to get into new markets and introduce fighters, homegrown fighters, hopefully, and cultivate those markets. So we could certainly see an international footprint kind of taking their foot off of that gas pedal.
And I like what Robin said. Did it work? And maybe it hasn't worked to begin with, but you got to start somewhere. It's just like, look where we are right now in 2016. When Zuffa purchased the UFC in 2001, nobody knew what the UFC was. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a special on New York fighters, and I'm focusing on one of the fights, Frank Trigg and Matt Hughes, and that was like 45,000 pay-per-view buys. So you have to start somewhere. If you want 1 million pay-per-view buys, you have to start with 40,000 pay-per-view buys. And you just imagine there would be expansion, but not everybody's on the same page.
We got to talk about a fight, any fight right now, because with 2 minutes left, we haven't even talked about fighting. That goes against everything that I believe. Who do you want to?
You guys are going to be taking off next week from Montreal, so we're not going to have a whole lot of time to discuss this next week, but TKO returns next Friday night. It's going to be airing live here on Fight Network. You two are going to be calling the action.
And the rest of the world, you can get it on Fight Pass.
Yeah.
Yes. What are you guys expecting from this version of TKO? We've discussed it's a very different Canadian marketplace than when TKO held their last event, and they were running the Bell Center consistently with the talent that is available and starting this up. Is this something you guys can look from an objective standpoint viable long-term at regional mixed martial arts in Canada?
I would have said 5 years ago, I don't know if this is a great move because the market was so saturated. There were shows all the time going down in Quebec, and if you look at Alberta, there was a slew of shows going down. Now I think the Canadian market has been starved for shows. I mean, the UFC hasn't been in Toronto in quite some time, and when you look at the health of mixed martial arts in Quebec, it's not where it once was. Now you're going back to the formula of having some of the same ties that you had from back in the day. You know, you have guys like Justin Bruckman, who was competing in UCC TKO. Now you have his pupils, Chris Horodecki, who was a part of that old TKO regime. He's coming back. The idea is to just entertain the fans, build the talent, because eventually that talent's going to make the move to the Ultimate Fighting Championship, but entertain the masses, the hardcore fans, the grassroots fans, and they're going to come to the show because it's going to be a hell of a night.
On 5 Rounds Today, next week, we're going to try to get Chris Horodecki and Josh Hill, and we'll talk to them about their fights.
Lots of TKO discussion next week, and the UFC returns next weekend, and we are back each and every weeknight at 6 Eastern here on Fight Network for Fight News Now.